remember that time 2,000 years ago when that little boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish. 7. 5 plus 2, the number of creation. And if we've got to create something, if there's a change that has to happen in our lives, we've got to get into that childlike attitude. Open-eyed wonder and possibility. And so in this now moment, we acknowledge our grateful heart. I have a grateful heart, and my grateful heart touches, and everything it touches is transformed in gratitude. It was never about the loaves and the fish. It was about the energy and the life and the vibration of thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I recreate that scene, and I begin by getting quiet as he had them all sit down. I say, be still, my mind. Be still, my feelings, my thoughts. And I become so still that I can feel my heart beating and notice my breath coming in and out. I am so grateful. And I remember that he looked up. And so I allow myself to lift up, to lighten up and let go. That self of faith, that part of me that is untethered, open and receptive to all possibility. That part of me is opening up and lifting up and opening wide. And then he gave thanks, and I just move into that gratitude space of thank you, thank you, thank you, that touches everything and transforms all it touches. That inner child, that inner quiet, that lifting up, that gratitude entered into the substance of what was and turned it into the possibility of what could be. Oh God, my heart is overfilled and overflowing with gratitude in this now moment. And I'm just going to move into that space where all my heart can say is thank you, thank you, thank you. And then he moved into action and passed around what he had. And we move into directed, focused action now that we have taken that spiritual substance into our hearts and we have lifted it up and we've given thanks. And we're moving into the fulfillment of our heart, our soul, our dream. The fulfillment of the being that we are. Thank you for the very best. Thank you. Thank you for the highest good. Thank you. Thank you for divine order and blessings for all. Thank you. Thank you. And so it is. Amen. So gratitude does not require anything to exist for it to do its work. It doesn't require any conditions. You know, the famous quotes from Paul, give thanks in all things, give thanks in all situations, all circumstances. Didn't say give thanks because of all circumstances or for all circumstances. It's in all circumstances. You don't have to wait for your ducks to get in a row. You know, I found out my ducks like to float downstream. They don't really ever get in a row. You know, you got to kind of flow with your ducks, okay? That's a whole different talk. But I'm talking about giving thanks for things as they are. And the famous psalm, let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Not because of it or for it, but it's like you put the energy into the middle of it. You put the energy into the middle of it, and it transforms what's there. It's just ordinary bread and fish, feeding of the 5,000. Here's the story, and this is a translation. My favorite Bible version, it's called the Unvarnished Version. You never heard of it because it's so controversial. He had to go to a Muslim press to get it published, but I love it. Okay? It says, Jesus felt sorry for the people, and when many hours had passed, his students came to him and said, this place is in the middle of nowhere and the hour's already late. Let them go so they can go into the villages and the fields around here and buy themselves something to eat. And he said, give them something to eat yourselves. And they said to him, you want us to go buy $200 worth of bread and give it to them to eat? And he said to him, well, how much bread do you already have? Go see. And they found a young boy, and they brought him up to him with 5 loaves and 2 fish. So he told them to sit down group by group on the green grass. And they sat down plot by plot, hundreds and fifties. And they took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and gave it to him. And he took them, and looking up into the heavens, into the sky, he gave thanks, and he broke the loaves, and he gave them to his students to hand out to them, and divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and had their fill. Literally, it meant were full like a barnyard animal, like stuffed like a pig. Seriously, it's the word they used for it. And then they cleared away 12 baskets full of bread and fish, and those eating were 5,000 men, plus women and children. So this is a story about entering into ordinary substance, the conditions of life, of an attitude. You know, have a grateful heart, and let your grateful heart touch everything, and let everything it touches be transformed, and it will increase and increase and increase. I love telling the story about the time in 1978 when I took a trip down to Santa Fe, New Mexico for ministerial school. And one of my classmates was the former assistant attorney general of that state, and he'd lived many years in Santa Fe. And I said, where should I go? And he told me about, the miraculous staircase that was supposedly built by St. Joseph. I mean, all these great places. But the one place that he told me I had to go to was Chimayo, the Santuario de Chimayo. How many people have heard of that? It's Chimayo. It's a little village, and people there still don't speak English for the most part. They mostly speak what would be considered an Elizabethan form of Spanish. Like it's a very, they've lived so isolated. They speak an ancient form of Spanish. But what happened was around 1880, one of the villagers had a dream in which he saw a light from a cave that was across the ravine where he'd never been, and he crossed the ravine the next morning, and there was a cave there, and he went in and he found a beautiful ornate cross that was carved, Catholic cross, but it was made out of wood. They found out later when they did the studies that it's only found in Central America, and nobody ever could figure out where it came from. And so they thought, this is a miracle. So they put the cross in the ground, and then they started building, the people of this village, an adobe church. But, they had never done that before, so when you go to see it, there's one of the bell towers is leaning this way, and the other one's a little taller, and it looks kind of like Gumby or something. It's kind of a very interesting place. But off to the side, my friend told me, there's a hole in the ground that miraculously fills with sacred dirt every morning. And people then take the dirt and make poultices out of it, and they get healed. Well, I wanted to see that, right? So I got there around 6:37 a.m. It was very cold that morning. And I was there by myself. I was meditating, and it was so powerful, the energy. All the walls of this side room to the sanctuary were covered with crutches and wheelchairs and all kinds of things, and prosthetic limbs and things like that. And I was there in the quiet, and I was startled when somebody came in, and it turned out to be this elderly gentleman in a really ratty sweater. And he came up and introduced himself to me with a Scottish brogue, which was very out of place in the place, and said he was the priest. And I said, "Oh, I thought they didn't have a priest." He says, "Well, I had read about this place in my parish in Scotland, and I wanted to come when I retired and just be their priest for free. They pay me in chickens, you know." And so he says, "Well, I come every morning," and I looked down, and he had a bucket full of dirt. And I saw him, and he starts pouring the dirt into the sacred hole. And I said, "Wait a minute, I thought the dirt miraculously showed up every morning." He says, "Oh, it's not the dirt, it's their faith." And think about that. Think about that. It's not the dirt. It's not the loaves and the fish. It's not the condition in your life that you're dealing with. It's not the answer that you have in your head. It's what enters into it. And I said, "Well, what about all of this and around the walls and all these?" He always says, "Miracles happen all the time." He says, "The stories I could tell you, this is commonplace. It's constant." In fact, I had somebody in the first service tell me about a miracle that happened at Chimayo to her in the first service today. So this is a sacred place. But it wasn't the dirt. Gratitude enters into the ordinary substance of your life and conditions. In everything, every condition, give thanks, and then it transforms the conditions there. But we have to have that attitude. Well, that's talked about in this little story. And what happened in this little story? The first thing that showed up was a little boy. Jesus said, you get me something to eat. And so they found this little boy. What does that tell you, metaphysical Bible interpreters? Is there something in you, that little child in you, that needs to engage with this situation? That when you're in the middle of something, I don't know about you, but the last thing I get into is my playful childlike self when I'm going through a crisis, but that's what you need. And so there's some steps and stages to get into that childlike self. And what does a child do? Child's open. Child's teachable. Child doesn't know any better. I mean, this little child, if he was that age today, probably believed in the tooth fairy and the Easter bunny and Santa Claus, and is totally open to wonder and possibilities. And there he is. But he's the one who has the goodies. And so what is it in you that needs to open up? You've got a child inside of you that wants to express, and you got to get in touch with that child. You know, one of the things about a child's intuitive. You know, when Jason was about 4 years old, we'd put him in a preschool, and the preschool shut down. Well, it was a good preschool, but the next one wasn't so good, and he didn't like it. So we're thinking, we're going to put Jason, and we're talking about it, and he's in the back seat, and he goes, "Hey, how about that M school?" We said, "M school? What are you talking about?" "You know, the M school." He's 4 years old. I just found Montessori, because, you know, Montessori school started with Unity. The first 5 Montessori schools in the United States were Unity churches. And so I thought, maybe it's Montessori. He says, "Yeah, that's it, the M school." Well, it turns out later, when he got older, he explained to us that he didn't know what Montessori meant. It was just on the back of all the cars in Detroit, they have the University of Michigan M. And he knew it had something to do with it. But it doesn't matter. He was open to his intuition. We put him in the M school, the Montessori school, and he thrived in that environment. And he stayed in the M school up through the 3rd grade, the entire time he was there. Except for a short time we put him in the public school, and we had to put him back in the M school. So, but there's a child in you that knows what to do, how to do it, knows how to change their consciousness, is flexible. Remember I told you about being a chess piece for God? Get the felt on the bottom of your chess piece so you can get moved around. You know, I shared this, maybe you weren't here a couple weeks ago, but you have to be flexible. You can have Velcro. You got to be open like a child. Okay, so that's the first thing. There's the child, childlike wonder, intuitive, open. And then the first thing, what did he tell him to do? Sit down. Sit down. You know, me, I'm in my squirrel cage. I'm running around and around and around when I have a problem. And Jason and I always joke with each other about that because both of us have a tendency to lose things a lot. And when he lost his iPad recently, I said, "Jason, you know what to do," because he was really upset about it. He said, "You're right. Thank you, God, for my iPad. This or something better." And you always get led to it. unless you're not supposed to have it and you're supposed to get a new one or whatever it is because you're in a new consciousness, and that's a whole different talk. So you got to be open. But it's amazing how things will just show up. Somebody will call you. I found your driver's license in the parking lot. Things like that. So stopping. A friend of mine had up on his wall a sign saying, "My philosophy of life, the 3 ups. Shut up, grow up, and lighten up." You know, lighten up. And that's the next step. Looking up at the skies, looking up in the heavens. You know, the same word, we've got the word sky and we got the word heaven. And they kind of mean the same thing, literally. But in their culture, they only had one word and it meant the same thing. And it was Jesus looked up into the heavens, in the higher consciousness, that lightening up consciousness. Now, you all know about the spiritual thermometer. And if you don't, get a copy of it. That's outside of Fellowship Hall on that little table. But this will show you a depiction of how you can move your consciousness up. You know, a few days ago, Jason said to me, "I've been below a 5 today." And I said, "What do you need to do?" He says, "I know I need to just lighten up." And he did some spiritual work and he lightened up. You got to lift up out of the below the 5, above the 5. There's a scale of 1 to 10. And it's up to you where your consciousness is. And it isn't conditional on the loaves and the fish or the dirt in the ground or any of the conditions in life. It's where you want to put it. So Jesus looked up. He looked up in the sky. Now, what else might lighten you up? Light. I mean, light has 2 terms, right? 2 meanings. There's the illumination of light, and that's important. But there's also the lightening up of light, getting lighter. And I shared a few weeks ago about the woman in my church who came to me and said, "You know, I'm a court reporter." She was in the most really serious courtroom in Albuquerque. Which how many people have seen Breaking Bad? Raise your hand. That's Albuquerque. Seriously, she'd see this and she said, "I get so really brought down by the things I see every day." And I said, "Put light around the people every day and give thanks for light around them." And she did that, and it created such a transforming attitude and consciousness in her life that what happened? She became a unity minister, and she has a church today in Albuquerque. And but you got to decide that you're going to lift up into a new consciousness, to move into a new awareness. And getting lighter is a part of that. And so for each one of us, let's just move into that consciousness of lightness, that lifting up consciousness that looks up into that new place. Okay, so let's talk about this. We're talking about the little kid. We're talking about the getting quiet. We're talking about the lifting up and looking in the skies, getting lighter. And then what's the next thing he did? He gave thanks. And we talk about it here. Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. Together. Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. Okay. This is so important because it will enter into any circumstance you're in and will transform it. And I occasionally share this story about my Christmas miracle of thank you, God. My sister, one time about 25 years ago, called me up and said, "I want you to go with me to the Bracebridge dinner at the Ahwahnee Hotel in Yosemite Valley." She lives in Oakland. And we looked it up, and this is a pageant with a formal banquet. You wear tuxes and formal gowns. And it was created by Ansel Adams, the famous photographer. And he wrote the whole thing, and they've been doing it ever since. Well, it's so in demand that they do it for 25 nights. And throughout the month of December, it ends on December 25th, Christmas night. And the odds of winning the lottery to get a ticket were 50 to 1. Let alone, I told her, I couldn't make it because of my schedule as a minister. The only night I could make it would be December 25th, and you don't get to pick your day. And she said, "Let's just give thanks that if it's right, it's right." My sister said that to me. I said, "Okay," so we gave thanks. And guess what? She won the lottery for December 25th. You're only allowed 2 tickets. And so I was going to fly there. So I get up real early in the morning, and I had, of course, scheduled it so I had lots of time. So I got up real early, and they canceled my flight. And the next flight that was available for a transfer in Dallas to go to the San Francisco airport would not have made my connection. But I just decided I'm going to have that childlike attitude because I had nothing to lose. And I had fun. All that day, all I said was, together, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. And I just kept doing it. Well, we landed in Dallas, and I ran to the gate, and they shut the gate, and they wouldn't let me on the plane. Well, darn, and there's no way that my bag would have made it because bags move slower than people do. So I just kept saying, thank you, God. And I turned around, and there's another airline that has a flight that was leaving in about a half hour to San Francisco. And I talked my way on the plane. Have you ever done that? I've never done that. But I did. They said, oh, come on. We'll put you in there. So I did. But the thing is I got off the plane, and of course I knew my luggage wasn't going to be there. And I had to change into my tux. And you couldn't go into this banquet unless you showed up on time. They locked the doors, and they make no exceptions. So, boy, it's a 3-hour drive from San Francisco Airport. I've got 2 hours now. But I get off the plane, and right there, at the wrong airline, there are my bags. I don't know how that happened. I even went back and tried to recreate it. There's no way that could have happened, but that's the least of it. So I'm standing in line at the rent-a-car place. There's a huge line. And the last person asked for directions, I'm not exaggerating, for 20 minutes. When I got up there and I finally got into the car, I had about an hour and a half to go a 3-hour drive, and it was an ice storm. And they put me in a Kia Rio with a little narrow tires. And do you know what I did all the way to Yosemite together? Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. I got there 10 minutes to spare, went into the men's room, changed into my tux, went in and had 2 or 3 minutes and had I couldn't tell you a thing about that Bracebridge dinner or what the pageant was about, but I remember this together. Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. I'm telling you this story because this happens when you open your consciousness. I remember when I was a church organist, and it was the daylight savings time, and the church was a half hour from my home, and they called me at 10 minutes till. And I had not realized it was daylight savings time. But luckily, the former organist was there, and so she was going to take over for me. But I just said, thank you, God, and I got there before the opening statement. I don't know how it happened. I moved through the fourth dimension because I said, thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God. You have to enter into that ordinary circumstance and with that childlike attitude. These things really happened. There's another story of giving thanks and moving into, because that's the next step that happened, was after he gave thanks, they moved into focused action. But we moved here from Detroit, and the nationwide crash took place in 2009, right? But Detroit had gone into recession in 2003 and depression in 2007. The big three were crashing. It's interesting, though, that since then they make such good cars that they can't sell enough of them. They're doing great, and the economy there is better than it is here, or even in the national average. But at that time, it was in such dreadful shape that this is what happened. I was going to do a talk, and I was going to do it and try to publicize it on, like we did when I first moved here, about praying for the local football team, just because it was going to be a funny talk about prayer. And my meditation teacher said, why don't you pray for the economy? And so I said, yeah. So I announced it, and some woman in the office said, it takes 21 days to make something like that happen, I heard. I don't know if that's true or not, but she said, why don't we do something in 21 days? And my meditation teacher said, yeah, why don't you do that? And so I was going to have a picnic in the local park, and we were going to say a prayer and hold hands. And 2 people on the same day, I'd gotten in touch with some media, 2 people on the same day said to me, why don't you do it at the main square downtown, which is what's it called, Hart Plaza. It's like the Times Square of Detroit. And so I found out what it cost, and somebody came forward anonymously and paid for the whole thing. But I was told by the powers that be, you cannot talk to the media. And the reason why is because they'd had bad experiences with the media in that church in the past. I just went ahead and did it. I sent out all these press releases, but I was told by the interfaith group, they said, you have to make coalitions, you got to do all the political things, this is never going to work, you can never do this, we say no, you can't do this, all these things. Well, by that time, we had 19 days. And I just said, thank you for sharing, and just kept going. I got contacted by the main columnist, the Mike Royko or the Studs Terkel or whatever of that town, and she was a hard-bitten agnostic who didn't particularly like religion at all, and she called me up very tough questions, but I just was sincere. She said, "Why are you doing this?" I said, "Look, the economy's pretty bad, and you got to do what you got to do, and what do? You don't sit in the middle of Interstate 696 and wait for a truck to run you over. You write columns about it. That's what you do, because that's what you know how to do. All I know how to do is pray." And by the end, she wrote the most glowing article. Everybody else picked up on it. Got all over the media. Then 3 days before, I had a dream. It was about a thermonuclear underground test that had positive fallout. What did that mean? Well, we showed up the day of the event. By that time, we had found out that the Archdiocese of Detroit had told all of its seminarians that they were required to go. That all the imams told all the Muslims in the city to go. All the Hindu temples went. The biggest Protestant churches in Detroit were all represented. The only people that didn't come were the Buddhists. For some reason, the Buddhists didn't want to come. I think they wanted to do some fundraiser for it. We told them they couldn't do it, so all the Buddhists were mad. Everybody else was happy, though. And they all showed up. But there was a monsoon that day. A monsoon that, how they come off the Gulf of Mexico about every 3 years, and it just pours. It happened that day. Well, we figured no, he was going to show up. Besides, it's an outdoor event. We had no plan B. And I looked over and I said, "What's that?" And there's an opening that went down underneath the entire Hart Plaza, a huge thing. 1,000 people showed up. We all went underneath, and because it was in such a compact place, the energy was unbelievable. And Obama was in front of the sign when he had come that week. I've got pictures of that. That was the weekend that the mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick, resigned. The new mayor's representatives were there. The governor talked about it. It was above the fold. It was the lead story in all the television, radio, and all the newspapers the next day. And what that was about was to bring about a change of gratitude, because our prayer was for 21 days giving thanks for the transformation of the economy, which was shortened to "I Lift Detroit in Prayer." Bumper stickers were made. An anonymous person donated tens of thousands of dollars. Bumper stickers became so popular, you can still see them there. There's actually a store called the Lift Detroit store that is its theme, that last time I checked was still there. There was a hit record in Canada that didn't like it, that said we were just praying about stuff, we shouldn't be doing it. But it was still kind of cool that there was a hit record about it. And all these things it became this huge thing. 21 days. How did that happen? Just saying together, "Thank you, God, thank you, God, thank you, God." It works with little things, too. There was a woman in my church many years ago who had been given a terminal cancer diagnosis, and she was told, you have to go through chemotherapy. It could extend your life, but, this is terminal cancer. It had metastasized. So she told me one Sunday, she said, I had read about Myrtle Fillmore, the Unity's co-founder, and how she'd healed herself of 3 terminal illnesses, and how she'd used her gratitude and her giving thanks. And she said, this week they wanted to give me chemo, but they'd given me so much stuff that they couldn't get a vein. And it was going on for hours, and finally I remembered Myrtle Fillmore, and I said the prayer of thanksgiving that Myrtle had said, and it was a specific prayer, but it was a giving thanks. And she said, a vein popped up, they were able to give me the chemo, and last time I talked to her, she was still alive, the cancer had disappeared. And this was not in the cards. I'm sharing this with you because the ordinary things, it's not the dirt, it's not the loaves and the fish, it's not the conditions of life. It's your faith that you bring into and you place into the substance of what is, and then it expands like the leavening in the loaf, making it palatable and making it so much better than hardtack. It's just your life opens up. So think about this again. What did he do? He got a little child. Open your heart like a child. And they all sat down. They got real quiet. And we have meditation on Tuesday nights. Silent meditation. At least stop for a moment. Stop. Just stop. And then he looked up and he lifted up his eyes. He lifted up his consciousness. He brought the light to it. And then what did he do? He gave thanks. He gave thanks, and then he moved into focused action. It's not action that's just to release your anxiety, but action that has built up a consciousness. And that's what we're doing here. And whatever's going on in your life, this attitude will transform it. Anything that your grateful heart touches will be transformed by this attitude. So let's close our eyes and just kind of move through this again. Get into that playful space in your heart. That child in your heart, that part of you that just is willing, that's willing to be open, that knows that it may have 5 loaves and 2 fish, but it's something, and you're grateful in the middle of it. And then move into the quiet. Allowing yourself to become quiet. And lift up your eyes. And lift up. Lift up. And give thanks. And let's just say together 3 times, okay? Together. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. Thank you, God. We feel that energy. And we move into action, focused, directed action. And we give thanks. Thank you, God. And so it is. Amen. We need a drummer. All right. Remember that time 2,000 years ago when that little boy had 5 loaves and 2 fish. 7. 5 plus 2, the number of creation. And if we've got to create something, if there's a change that has to happen in our lives, we've got to get into that childlike attitude. Open-eyed wonder and possibility. And so in this now moment, we acknowledge our grateful heart. I have a grateful heart, and my grateful heart touches, and everything it touches is transformed in gratitude. It was never about the loaves and the fish. It was about the energy and the life and the vibration of thank you, thank you, thank you. And so I recreate that scene, and I begin by getting quiet as he had them all sit down. I say, be still, my mind. Be still, my feelings, my thoughts. And I become so still that I can feel my heart beating and notice my breath coming in and out. I am so grateful. And I remember that he looked up. And so I allow myself to lift up, to lighten up and let go. That self of faith, that part of me that is untethered, open and receptive to all possibility. That part of me is opening up and lifting up and opening wide. And then he gave thanks, and I just move into that gratitude space of thank you, thank you, thank you, that touches everything and transforms all it touches. That inner child, that inner quiet, that lifting up, that gratitude entered into the substance of what was and turned it into the possibility of what could be. Oh God, my heart is overfilled and overflowing with gratitude in this now moment. And I'm just going to move into that space where all my heart can say is thank you, thank you, thank you. And then he moved into action and passed around what he had. And we move into directed, focused action now that we have taken that spiritual substance into our hearts and we have lifted it up and we've given thanks. And we're moving into the fulfillment of our heart, our soul, our dream. The fulfillment of the being that we are. Thank you for the very best. Thank you. Thank you for the highest good. Thank you. Thank you for divine order and blessings for all. Thank you. Thank you. And so it is.